The morning sun had just begun peeking over the hills when Sarah Harper stepped onto her front porch, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. She took a deep breath, savoring the crisp autumn air mixed with a familiar sense of hay and earth. Her farm had been in her family for 3 generations, and she had fought tooth and nail to keep it running. Rusty, her loyal border collie, wagged his tail beside her. The morning felt like any other, peaceful, steady, until she heard the rumble. At first, she thought it was a delivery truck, but then she saw it, a tow truck, followed by 3 shiny black SUVs pulling into her driveway. The sight made her stomach clench. Sarah set down her mug and hurried toward them, wiping her hands on her jeans. Before she could say a word, a woman with a cold smile and perfectly styled hair stepped out. "You must be Sarah Harper," the woman said, her tone clipped and authoritative. "I'm Judith Mercer, president of Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association." Sarah frowned. "I think you have the wrong house. I don't belong to an HOA. Judith handed her an envelope. So thick it could have been a novel. "You do now. Your property was rezoned last quarter, and you're officially part of our community. That means you owe back dues and must comply with HOA regulations." Sarah flipped through the papers, her heart pounding faster. A $2,300 fine for unpaid dues. A $4,500 violation for unauthorized farm animals. A final notice stating all non-compliant livestock must be removed immediately. She felt the world tilt beneath her. "My family has owned this land for 40 years, she said, her voice shaking. "This is a farm. You can't just rezone it and act like I agreed to this." A tall man in a designer suit stepped forward. "Actually, we can," he said smoothly. "I'm Tyler Mercer, the developer of Willow Creek Estates. The county approved our petition to incorporate all properties within these boundaries." He pulled out a map. Sarah's farm sat in the middle of a sea of newly built houses, like a lone island about to be swallowed whole. It wasn't a mistake. They had planned this, and she was standing directly in their way. Before she could respond, men in uniforms moved toward her barn. "Hey, stop! What are you doing?" she yelled, running toward them. "Removing non-compliant livestock," Judith said, checking her clipboard as if this were just another routine task. Sarah threw herself in front of the barn doors. "These are my rescue animals. They're my family. You can't just take them." Rusty barked furiously, pacing beside her. One of the workers reached for Biscuit, her 17-year-old miniature pony. "No, wait. He's old. He has arthritis. He can't be transported like this." Sarah begged. The man hesitated, but Judith's icy voice rang out. "Keep moving." Sarah felt helpless as Biscuit whinnied, terrified, struggling against the rope. Her goats cried out. Her chickens flapped in panic as they were hauled away. Sarah turned to Sheriff Jenkins, the local officer she'd known since childhood. "Tom, please. You know me. You know this is wrong." The sheriff wouldn't meet her eyes. "Their paperwork is in order, Sarah. I can't stop this." The words shattered her. Sarah watched her animals disappear down the road in a county truck, their scared eyes peering back at her. Judith handed her another paper. "You have 2 weeks to pay your fines, or we'll place a lien on your property." Sarah stood paralyzed in her driveway, Rusty whimpering at her side. They had taken everything, and she had no idea why. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat in her kitchen, staring at the envelope of nightmares they had handed her. Something felt wrong. She opened her laptop, searching through county records. Hours passed. Then she found it, a rezoning petition, dated 6 months ago. But the notices were only sent out 3 weeks ago, long after any legal challenge could be made. And then another name caught her eye. Commissioner Phillips, the same man who had approved every rezoning request for Willow Creek Estates. The same man who had received thousands in campaign donations from Tyler Mercer's development company. Her farm wasn't just collateral damage. It was a prize. And they were going to break her until she gave it up. Her hands shook as she picked up her phone. She needed help, and she knew exactly who to call. "Sarah, this is seriously illegal," said Emma, her best friend from high school, now an investigative journalist. Emma dug deeper. And the more she found, the sicker Sarah felt. The HOA was targeting her on purpose. Her property taxes had mysteriously doubled. Her insurance company suddenly flagged her farm as under review. Then, late one night, Sarah caught Tyler Mercer sneaking onto her land. She grabbed her phone and filmed him as he pointed at her barn, whispering with another man. The next morning, Emma called her, voice urgent. "Sarah, I found something. They're planning a man-made lake right where your house stands." A chill crawled up Sarah's spine. They weren't just harassing her. They were trying to erase her. Sarah gathered every document, every email, every zoning map. She reached out to neighbors, and what she heard shocked her. "I moved here because your farm was part of the sales pitch," said Eleanor, a retired teacher. "Now they want to erase it?" "They towed my car for unauthorized parking in my own driveway," Henry added. "They fined me $800 for planting the wrong type of flowers," Rachel said. People were furious. That same evening, Sarah received a phone call. Miss Harper, a nervous voice whispered, "I live in the new development. I have recordings." Sarah met him in secret. It was Harold Jenkins, a neighbor who had been secretly recording HOA meetings. "They've been planning this takeover for months," he whispered. Judith even said, "We'll use whatever means necessary to get rid of the old farm lady." Sarah's blood boiled. That night, Emma's article hit the front page. By noon, the county was under investigation. By evening, Judith and Tyler were arrested. By morning, the HOA was dissolved. And Sarah's farm? It was now a permanent community trust, a place for children to ride biscuit and seniors to tend gardens. At the entrance, a new sign stood tall. "Willow Creek Community Farm. All welcome. Be kind or leave." Sarah smiled. They had tried to erase her. But instead, they had created something even better. And this time, it would last forever. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, eyes burning from exhaustion. She was running on coffee, fury, and a desperate hope that anyone would listen. The farm was silent, except for the occasional creak of the windmill outside. Rusty lay at her feet, his ears twitching in his sleep. Her phone vibrated. A message from Emma, her journalist friend. Check the front page. Sarah clicked the link. Developer corruption exposed. HOA used to seize private land. She sucked in a sharp breath. The article was everywhere. Emma had uncovered everything. The illegal rezoning, the bribery, the campaign donations, and, most damning of all, the HOA's real plan to force her off her land. Sarah didn't even have time to process it before her phone exploded with calls. The local news wanted an interview. A lawyer offered to take her case for free. And then, a call from a number she didn't recognize. Miss Harper, a quiet voice said, "My name is Harold Jenkins. I live in the new development." Sarah frowned. "How can I help you?" "Not me," he whispered. "But I can help you. I've been recording HOA meetings. I have proof." Sarah sat up straighter. Proof? She gripped the phone tighter. That was all she needed. By evening, Sarah's living room was packed. She had expected maybe one or two neighbors to show up. Over 20 people were standing in her home. Eleanor, the elderly woman who had moved in last year, was fuming. "I bought my house because I love the view of your farm, and now they want to erase it." Rachel, a young mother, crossed her arms. "Judith fined me $800 because my flower beds weren't the right shade of pink. I'm done being bullied." Henry, a retired teacher, shook his head. "They fined me for a bird feeder. Then my garbage wasn't picked up for 3 weeks." But the biggest shock came when Marco, an HOA board member, spoke up. "I started asking questions about the budget last month," he admitted. "Next thing I know, Tyler Mercer is accusing me of conflict of interest and pressuring me to resign." The room fell silent. "They don't just want Sarah's land," Marco said. "They want to control all of us." Sarah felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. That night, Sarah sat on her porch, watching the last light fade behind the hills. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel alone. Rusty lay beside her, his head resting on her boot. Then, the sound of tires on gravel. Sarah stiffened. A black SUV crept slowly past her house. She could see the driver's silhouette, a man in a hoodie, snapping pictures of her property. Her stomach twisted. A moment later, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Drop the fight before you lose everything. Sarah's hands tightened around the phone. She took a slow, steady breath. She had lost everything before, and she had come back. She wasn't stopping now. The next morning, Sarah walked into the courthouse with her head held high. Behind her, 27 neighbors. Ahead of her, Judith and Tyler Mercer, sitting stiffly at the defense table. Sarah's heart pounded as a judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, flipped through the case file. First, the documents, showing how Commissioner Phillips fast-tracked the rezoning changes for the HOA. Then, Harold's recordings. The room fell dead silent as Judith's voice played through the speakers. We'll use whatever means necessary to force the old farm lady out. And then, Tyler's voice laughing. Once we get that ISO rezoned for luxury homes, we'll make millions. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sarah's fingers dug into the table. The judge slammed her gavel down. This court is deeply disturbed by the evidence presented, she said coldly. I am granting an emergency injunction against the HOA, freezing all actions against the homeowners pending a full investigation. Judith went pale. Tyler stormed out of the courtroom. And Sarah, for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. Come home. The fight wasn't over. But before she could think about anything else, she had something important to do. Sarah drove straight to the county animal shelter. The receptionist looked startled when Sarah placed a stack of cash on the counter. All of it, Sarah said. I'm taking them home. A few minutes later, she walked into the kennel area, heart pounding. Biscuit perked up at the sight of her, whinnying. Sarah laughed through her tears as she rushed to him. Oh, buddy, she whispered, stroking his coat. You're coming home. Mabel, her oldest goat, nuzzled against her leg. Her chickens clucked and flapped as she opened their cages. Rusty barked, spinning in happy circles. She loaded her animals into the trailer, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. They were safe. They were home. And as she looked toward the horizon, where her farm stood proud and unbroken, she made a promise. This wasn't over. She had won the battle. But the war, that was just beginning. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a flicker of peace. Her animals were home. The HOA was frozen. And her neighbors, people she had barely spoken to before, had become her greatest allies. Over the past few days, they had helped her fix the damage done by the HOA. Henry painted the barn doors, Eleanor planted new flowers, and Rachel's kids helped gather eggs. It almost felt like things were returning to normal, until that one terrible night. Sarah woke gasping for air. Something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of smoke. Rusty was already barking at the door, his whole body tense. Sarah raced to the window. Her barn was on fire. Her stomach dropped. Biscuit, the goats, the chickens, they were trapped inside. She didn't think. She just ran. What matters? The flames were already roaring, licking up the side of the barn, black smoke curling into the night sky. Sarah grabbed the barn doors, yanking them with all her strength. Too hot, too late. Her chest tightened with panic. Then a pair of strong hands pulled her back. Sarah, no. It was Henry and Marco, their faces etched with determination. We'll go in, Henry coughed. You get the water. Sarah stumbled back as three other neighbors rushed forward with hoses, their spray barely making a dent in the inferno. The barn groaned, the wooden beams creaking in protest. Then a crash. The side door was kicked open. Henry and Marco emerged, covered in soot, but leading Biscuit, the goats, and chickens out. Sarah sank to her knees in relief. They're safe, Marco gasped, coughing. We got 'em all. The fire trucks arrived, hoses blasting water onto flames. But Sarah wasn't watching. Her eyes were locked on something far more chilling. Along the back wall of the barn, the wood was soaked in something oily, and boot prints, fresh ones, led away into the dark. Her hands tightened into fists. This wasn't an accident. Someone had set this fire on purpose, and she had a feeling she knew exactly who. The next morning, Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed her laptop and pulled up the security footage from the night before. Her fingers trembled as she clicked through the videos. Then there he was. At 3:42 a.m., a figure in a hoodie crept toward the barn, a gas can in his hand. As he turned, the camera caught his face. Tyler Mercer. Sarah's breath left her in a rush. Her vision blurred with white-hot fury. He had done this. He had tried to burn her farm to ground. She grabbed her phone. No more waiting. No more playing defense. It was time to end this. The police arrived within the hour, sirens cutting through the quiet morning air. Sarah handed over the footage, her voice shaking with anger. Officer Rivera, a man she had known since childhood, watched the video in silence. Then he nodded. "We'll take it from here." And just like that, the entire scheme unraveled. The police got a search warrant for Tyler Mercer's house. Inside, they found a matching gas can, still smelling of fuel. But that wasn't all. Someone inside the county offices had leaked more documents. Documents proving Commissioner Phillips had been taking bribes for years. Judith and Tyler had forged zoning paperwork. The entire HOA was built on fraud. By the end of the week, the entire town was buzzing with shock and anger. Collision Tyler Mercer was arrested for arson and real estate fraud. Collision Judith was sentenced for forgery and racketeering. Collision Commissioner Phillips resigned in disgrace. Collision the HOA was officially dissolved. And just like that, the nightmare was over. Never fall again. A week after the fire, Sarah stood in front of her farm, watching something that brought tears to her eyes. Her neighbors had come together, not just to fight, but to rebuild. Eleanor's grandkids helped paint the new barn walls. Rachel's husband built new chicken coops. A contractor, a man Sarah had never even met before, offered his crew's labor for free. "My grandpa had a farm," he told Sarah, his voice thick with emotion. "Developers took it from him. Not happening again." Sarah wiped her eyes. For weeks, she had been fighting to save her land. Now, she realized something powerful. She had never been fighting alone. 3 months later, the Mercer's house was auctioned off. The community pooled their money and bought it. Instead of luxury homes, they turned it into something beautiful, a community trust. Green Heart, a farmer's market. Green Heart, a therapy center for children with disabilities. Green Heart, a place where seniors could garden. Sarah stood in front of a brand new sign at the entrance to her land. Willow Creek Community Farm. All welcome. Be kind or leave. She took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling her lungs. They had tried to erase her. Instead, they had created something even better. And this time, it would last for generations. The end. Why would you fight for your land like Sarah did? Let me know. Winking face fire.